Hello everyone. As always, you don't need an engaging video, you just need to be engaged. So lock in. Today, what I want to do is I want to show you the way you should be writing academic papers. This might apply to other kinds of writing as well, but I'm going to focus on academic papers. I thought to make this video, for one, because I'm going to require my students now to write in this way and show it in a Google Doc where they track changes so I could see the evolution of their papers. But I'm doing it for also the general public because I think, from my experience, a lot of students are not actually taught how to write well. They're given advice, things like create an outline, brainstorm, and then they did a little bit here and there for different classes. I'm going to show you something slightly different, an approach that I think is probably best backed by what we understand about how to write well. But in particular, I want to provide you a way of writing that's going to address what I think a lot of students face, which is what they consider to be like a writer's block, when they just sit there, stare blankly at a computer screen, not knowing exactly what to write, and then so they waste like an hour. So I'm going to try to show you the most efficient way I think there is of writing. There's a lot more to discuss on this issue. I can't go over all of it here. If you're a community college student, I highly recommend you take my class on effective learning. It's completely free for all community college students. And I provide that class because we go more into depth into not only how to write, but why certain ways of thinking through ideas prior to the writing helps you write, but also all the background stuff you need to take care of in order to put yourself in a space to write really, really well. Okay, so again, the focus here is going to be to address the plan, the approach to how to write an academic paper. I'm not going to be giving you details about exactly what to write. This is more just like planning the way in which you approach writing. Okay. All right, so first off, I want to kind of lay out some of the approaches that I think students often take. This is just from my own personal experience in conversations with students, some of the approaches that my students take and that I've seen in their own writing, in looking through their writing, the history of the document they create. So one strategy is to just sit down and just write. Like you take out your notes or all the reading material, whatever else you have, just start writing. Another option is to brainstorm a little bit first and then start just writing. And one interesting one is when students try to learn as they write, right? So they're trying to learn the content as they're writing. All of these are generally terrible strategies. These are just not very effective. One of the things that you're going to encounter if you take any of these strategies is you're probably going to have worse papers. Like the product is going to be probably will be worse. Some students are convinced that they can write a quality paper in one draft in one go, just by starting and then finishing all in one sitting. I think they're lying to themselves. I think they'll find that if they're that good of a writer, they'll be able to write probably a lot better. So, what I'm going to present in the approach is a way to write that will, I think, provide you with one, a more directed, intentional approach to writing. Two, more effective in terms of both time and quality of the work that you produce. And three, and I personally think that this is probably the most important, allows for more self-awareness of what it is that you're creating and where it is that you want to make change, right? So thinking more like an editor of your own paper, right? So a lot of students struggle with multiple drafts of papers. I think part of it is a lack of awareness of what it is that they're doing and how to adjust and where to adjust their writing. I think this approach that I'm going to suggest is going to help with all three of these areas. Okay, so let me switch over here real quick to this document here. Make sure there's enough room. And then I'll try to go over exactly how I think that you should write your paper. Okay. First things first, you need to create the document. Okay, so okay, so let me back up a little bit. Let's assume that you have at least done a little bit of reading, a little bit of taking notes. You have some, yeah, you need to know what you're talking about before you start talking about it. Okay. Now that said, if you really struggle with the content or you're really pressed for time, you can just get started as in the process I'm about to show you. But ideally, you try to learn some stuff before you get started. Okay. But I'm just going to assume that you at least tried. Maybe didn't get everything right, but you tried to understand the content before you started writing. Okay. All right. So what do you do first? Obviously, you need to create the document, right? So let's say this is your document. You've created it. Wonderful. Okay. Second step. All right. You need a game plan. You need to plan out what it is that you're going to write and have at least a general structure of what it is you're going to present. Okay. Now, here's what's cool. You could actually get started on this without knowing anything about the topic, because here's the reality. In an academic paper, at least in most introductory courses, the papers that I assign my students, right, in these introductory courses, you don't need to have the answers to everything, because the prompt kind of guides you on what you should be focusing on, right? So there should be a prompt, unless you're doing like an independent research project. I need to make a separate video for you if that's the case. But for most classes, you're going to have a prompt. You're going to have an instructor that says, hey, I need you to write an essay on this particular topic, right? On this particular reading, on this particular argument. I need you to elaborate on X, Y, and Z, okay? And there's a reason for that. The writing itself is a way for the instructor to know just how well you understand, comprehend, absorb, understood, learn the content that was being taught, okay? Whether you can express it clearly and accurately in your own words, okay? Now, there's various levels to this in terms of details, in terms of what you need to get to, but no matter what, there should be some sort of guiding, right, prompt that you are given. Okay, so in the document, you could lay out exactly what it is that you need to cover simply by copying and pasting the prompt, right? So you can actually just start here by just copying and pasting the prompt, okay? And usually the prompt is going to have multiple elements to it, right? So let me give you an example, right? So let's say in one of my introductory ethics course, right, I have students write a paper on utilitarianism, and specifically Mill's utilitarianism. So you have Mill's utilitarianism, okay? But then I also maybe ask, okay, you need to also explain Singer's solution to poverty. And then you need to do some comparing and contrasting. Okay. Now, this is very bare bone in the prompt. And as you can see, you can know nothing about the content and still have a general idea of what you need to include in your paper. Okay. So far, so good. I'm guessing this is pretty straightforward, right? Now, here's a mistake that I think a lot of students make. They wait until it's time to sit down and write the paper, to just start writing the paper. I actually recommend that you do this in stages, and there's a reason for it. What you want to do is you want to write some stuff out as much as possible that you understand, that you comprehend, that you're aware of. Start by writing down what you already have in your head that you understand, that you feel like you're fairly confident in, okay? And skip over all the stuff that you don't really understand. Then what you really want to do is you want to step back, okay? And in stepping back, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. First of all, your brain's going to have a chance to kind of process what it is you just dumped out. And it's going to have a chance to, on its own, usually while you're just distracted doing other things, start generating ideas for what else to add to the paper, or maybe even subtract from the paper, okay? But in the first step is to address the prompt. That's the focus of the paper. So laying out the prompt actually helps you. It, in some ways, kind of primes your brain, gets it ready, gets it in gear to start thinking about the specific content that you're going to need in order to write what you need to write, okay? All right. Now, you actually have a general structure for the paper just by the prompt, usually, right? Most instructors, they'll say you need to cover X, Y, and Z, and usually there's a clear kind of order in which this material needs to be presented because of the way that they're related to one another. But even if you don't know, that's fine. You can put a tentative sort of ordering, and then you could always rearrange later on down the line, okay? What you do need, though, is you need some sort of introduction, and you need a conclusion. Well, I'm going to put a question mark here. It depends on the type of paper. Again, there's no one way to write an academic paper. This is something that I think students have gotten into their head by instructions from previous educators. Like, I've heard the one I hear the most is like, oh, you need 5 paragraphs. The first paragraph is the introduction, last paragraph is a conclusion, 3 body paragraphs. You need a hook. is not the best advice, because it's a general rule of thumb. It's to get you started on writing academic papers. You don't necessarily need to follow it strictly, but it does help to bookend things. What I mean by that is having a way to introduce the topic and then have a way of some concluding remarks to kind of wrap things up nicely. One of the things you'll find is that in some cases a conclusion is not always necessary, but the intro is particularly important because you're trying to get the reader into the kind of right frame for everything else that you're going to present. Okay. Now the intro does need a thesis, and this is especially important in a philosophy paper. Okay. But the thesis is not the same thing as a hook. Okay. In fact, you don't really need a hook, at least in the way that a lot of students think of it. Again, the goal of the paper is to answer the prompt, right? It's to follow the writing guidelines and answer the prompt. If the prompt is not one in which you're supposed to like somehow move the audience with their feelings, then you don't need to include any rhetoric. You don't need to include any sort of grand hook. You don't need to do any of those things. What you want, especially in a philosophy paper, is just get straight to the point, right? Like academic papers generally is you have a point you're trying to make your point in the clearest, most concise manner possible, right? You probably don't like it when people make you read a bunch of stuff that isn't relevant to the main point that you're trying to make. I'm going to be the same way. Don't make me read more than I have to. Get straight to the point. Usually what's going to help with that is the thesis, making it very clear what the aims of your particular paper are, which honestly should already be very clear because the point of the paper is to answer the prompt. That's usually what it is, right? Okay. All right. Okay, so this is the first step. So let's call this round 1, all right, where you provide a general structure. And as I said, this is fairly simple. This is easy. This is not, you're not supposed to think about it too hard. You're trying to just reverse engineer based off of the prompt what needs to go into the paper. Okay. The second step, the round 2, okay, let's maybe change the color here. Okay, round 2, you're going to come in and you're going to now go through each of these sections that you've laid out and just start listing off things that you want to say. Right? That you claims that you think are relevant. You don't need to worry about the particular order. You're just brain dumping as much information as possible. Okay? So let's say you're thinking about Mill's utilitarianism. Sometimes it's in the prompt that there's certain things that you need to cover within it. But let's say there isn't anything like that. And then so now you're thinking, okay, these are the things that I think are relevant for explaining this particular moral theory. So you start writing things down. Okay? Now, here, I think one of the mistakes students make is they go straight to writing a draft. That's a mistake. You should, there could be phrases here. There could be just copying and pasting of definitions. There could be all kinds of stuff in here, listing, bullet points, whatever. All you're doing is you're gathering information and you're putting it around the place where it should be in the paper. That's really what you're doing. Okay? Now, I want to stress something here. Okay? You, as the writer of the paper, are responsible for any sort of what I like to call a cross-contamination, right? So sometimes we read something, let's say, or hear an explanation on a video, and then that somehow seeps into our mind, and then we regurgitate almost verbatim exactly what it is that we heard, instead of putting it into our own words. I want to be clear about something. You're responsible for the product you put out, okay? So I don't care if it's conscious or unconscious or how it is that you came up with the phrasing. If you are giving a phrasing or a presentation of idea that's far too close, not even exact, but far too close to something else that's already available that somebody else has made claim to, that's going to be, and you don't provide proper citation and give the other person credit, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. You're going to be responsible for what you put on paper. So in this stage, it is going to be critical for you to make sure that you identify when you're taking information from elsewhere and specifically where, right? So if you're taking it from the reading, you'll want to include citation, like let's say Mill, page 24, right? Okay. And if it's a direct quote, you want to make sure to put quotation marks here. And this is more so to ensure that you do not engage in any sort of behavior that could be deemed a violation of academic integrity, and then I have to have that conversation with you, and it's going to be real bad. It's not going to go well, okay? All right, so this is the next stage. Again, you're jotting down ideas. You don't need to be perfect. You don't even need to be completely accurate. I think that's one of the mistakes people make. They try to get it right the first time. They try to make their first draft their last draft. That's a dumb plan. That's not how the brain wants to work when it comes to writing. It's gonna lead to a lot of stalling. I like to call it stalling, where you get into a groove, you're in a flow, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's this thing. I know I should be putting it in there, but I forgot what it was, and now I'm gonna spend like 20 minutes looking it up and trying to figure out what that was, and then I put it in, and then by then you've kind of broken up your flow, and then so now you've stalled out and you can't get started again. You don't know what to say next. Okay, that's what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so this particular method is to try to get you to avoid those moments. Okay, by just jotting down whatever honestly that you could think of. Okay, just blah, 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 vomit it all out. Okay, all right. So this is where you add, where you do some brain dumping as much as possible. Okay, all right. Then we're going to go into round 3. Again, it doesn't need to be in these exact rounds, but I mean, I like to think of it in this way. Where now you're starting to think a little bit more carefully about how these ideas are related to one another, right? So this is where you're probably going to do a lot of moving around. You're going to move sentences or phrases or quotes around. Maybe this goes here, maybe this should go here, maybe this should go here. So you're thinking carefully about the more nuance of the structure within each of these sections that you're wanting to talk about, okay? In the process, okay, so in the process of organizing, you're also going to start identifying gaps, okay? You're going to start identifying gaps in your explanation. You're going to see that it's going to feel like something's missing, or you feel like you could elaborate on something. You might also start deleting some stuff here, right? So like in the process of reorganizing this information, you might realize that some of this information should just be straight deleted because it's not relevant to the conversation. Okay, maybe it doesn't address the prompt, something along these lines. All right. So you're doing all of these things. Again, doesn't need to be very clean, doesn't need to be exact. Okay. You might hold on to some key definitions. You might end up deleting some discussions of some nuances that you think are not particularly relevant or sidetrack. You might be thinking, okay, I need to probably add some example here to clarify the point. Maybe there's some nuances that is important. Okay. Now here, you don't need to actually write it out, but you could make a note, right? So especially of the gaps, I think, right? You could leave a note on what to add. Okay. I often do this by highlighting the section or putting a comment in there for myself, or, tagging it in some form or fashion. You can figure out what works best for you. Okay. Then, oh man, that's a terrible color. Let's go with this one. In the next round, okay, this is where you actually write your first draft, right? This is where you finally write out what it is that you want to say. Now, I want to point something out here, right? You don't need to start from scratch and rewrite everything. You could use a lot of the stuff that you've already written down, okay? This is also where you're going to add those noted items that you said you were going to now look up and clarify. Okay. There's something else that you can do in this stage. Okay. But in writing the first draft, here's one of the things that you're going to find. All right. You're going to find that by the time you've done round 1, 2, and 3, right? Like you're in round 4. You're going to have much greater clarity in exactly what you want to say and how you want to focus on those things, right? Like, I need you to understand that each of these rounds are designed to kind of force you to think about the paper in the right sort of way, right? The first round forces you to focus on the prompt, to make sure you don't deviate from the prompt, right? That's one of the major mistakes that students often make. They use a paper as a space to go ahead and just express everything that they've learned, and that's not the point of a paper. The point of the paper is to address the prompt, is to focus on the narrow thing that you're being asked to explain, describe, evaluate, apply, whatever else it might be, okay? Round two gets you to kind of dump out what you already have. And the reason for it is that you first want to know where you stand before you figure out, okay, what else do I need to look up, right? You don't want to do all of the work when you already have a lot of the information in your head, okay? Now, it's going to be a lot more work if you learn nothing, if you're just starting from scratch. But if you've already done some learning of the content, then you probably have quite a bit in your mind that you didn't even realize you knew, or at least have some vague awareness of. So brain dumping allows you to kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, I know more about this section. I maybe need to find out more and do some deeper digging on this other section, okay? Round three, again, allows you to kind of identify where some of these gaps are as you try to organize. And the organizing part here, the reorganizing, I should say, is particularly important because in writing, one of the core elements of good writing is that you are thoughtful in how you present the information, and specifically the order in which you present the information, right? And the idea is supposed to be this. You want the first idea you present to bring clarity to the second idea, which brings clarity to the third idea, to the fourth idea. Like there's a natural order to the presentation that allows the reader to make most sense of what it is that you're actually saying, right? And this doesn't happen just between paragraphs. This happens within a paragraph as well. So especially in round three, this is where transition words, right? Identifying good transition words. These are words that connect ideas together. Words like therefore, or reason, or why, or cause, if there's a causal relation, or if it's a hypothetical, right? Expressing, right? Hypothetically, if, right? Were the case. If they're correlated, right? Like these are relationships that you're trying to express, and you can express those really well by identifying exactly how these ideas are connected. You do that by reorganizing it in a way that makes sense based off of those specific relationships, okay? And then round four is where you actually get to the writing, but in the actual writing, one of the things that you find is that by the time you get to round four, because you've already thought through an order that makes sense, you've kind of gotten a sense of what information is missing, what needs to be added, what maybe could be taken out, okay? By the time you get to round four and you're just writing a draft, you'll be surprised just how much you can write in a short period of time, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced that state where you're just writing and you don't even recognize the time passing because you're just in the zone, right? You're more likely to get into that space if you do round 1, 2, and 3. Once you kind of have like a general idea, okay? But here's, I think, the biggest sort of benefit. Actually, there's a string of benefits to this approach, right? One, I know it seems like a lot of work because you're going through multiple rounds, right? There's like multiple rounds here, right? But if you actually think about it, each of these rounds, right, in terms of time, right, it's fairly minimal. The time you spend on each of these rounds is actually fairly minimal. Like just imagine the first round is actually one that's probably the fastest. It takes maybe like 2-3 minutes at most, okay? Round two, where you're just brain dumping, because you're just brain dumping and you're not worried about whether or not you have everything right, if you have everything, you know, you haven't necessarily even collected all your notes. You're just putting down as much as you can in this round. Because you're in that sort of state of just dumping everything out, it actually moves fairly quickly. Like you'd be surprised how much information you could get down in a short period of time. Okay? In round three is probably where you're going to spend the most amount of time. But even here, you already have a lot of the information. You're just thinking to yourself, okay, let me be more strategic about this now. Let me think about what I want to put in what order. And so what you're really doing is a lot of copying and pasting and deleting, right? And then highlighting for where you want to add stuff. That's really all you're doing, right? So you're moving stuff around. You're saying, okay, this should go first, this should go second, this should go third. Okay, maybe I want to break these up into different paragraphs here because there's too much in each of these sections. Okay, that's all you're doing. If you get good at this, I mean, it honestly does not take a significant amount of time, right? It might even take you less than how much time it takes for round two. And so if you've at least gone through these rounds, and again, you could add additional rounds in between if you want to continuously revise your work. But by the time you get to the writing of your first draft, right, because you've done all of this additional work ahead of time, that each round took very minimal amount of time and was fairly smooth each round, By the time you get to writing your draft, you'd be surprised just how fast that writing process goes, right? You will not, you'll just be able to sit down and just start writing, copying, pasting, deleting, like whatever you're utilizing the stuff that's already in front of you, okay? And here's the most important part. When you do it in this way, you don't get that constant break in the flow of ideas. And that's probably one of the most dangerous things for students in terms of time eater, right? You know, talking to students, one of the things you find is, and I've struggled with this myself early on as well, right? Which is when those moments when you're like, I don't know exactly what to write. I don't know what to say. I feel stuck, right? And then you just want to take a break and you just want to get away from it. I need to distance myself, okay? That process is minimized. That sort of experience is minimized when you by the time you get to round 4, okay? And so as a result, the whole process feels easier. Like it doesn't feel like a burden, right? The writing becomes smooth. You get to honestly enjoy writing again, right? Here's the other benefit that you get, okay? The quality of your papers are going to improve because following this sort of approach forces you to check all the boxes of things that you should be paying attention to and being more mindful of when you're writing a paper, right? Notice that with each round, you're thinking carefully about what to include, what to exclude, what to add here, which ones to put in which order, how to connect these ideas together, right? Where are the gaps in information? And one of the things you'll find is also that where the errors are along the way, right? So there's a kind of self-correcting mechanism that happens when you go through these multiple rounds that is far better than trying to do that sort of corrective process after you've written a draft. After you've written a draft, it's actually much harder to do this kind of editing because you have to read through so much in order to identify where there's a break, where you need to change things up. So by doing it in the way that I'm suggesting, you actually are able to improve the quality before even writing out your full first draft, okay? All right, and the third thing, and I think this is probably the biggest benefit, you start to read your own paper like a quality editor might read and provide feedback, right? You become more thoughtful, as I said, because you're forced to be more thoughtful. This is part of the process that's built in, that you have to think about the order at these different stages, okay? You gain more clarity in what you're doing and why. Notice that everything about these steps, you're in control. And because you're in control, you're much more aware of exactly what it is that you're doing at each step of the way, right? You are the author, right? The agent, the one in control at each of these rounds, right? And as such, as a result, you end up being in a much better position to judge what is going on in your paper, why it's happening, understanding then what needs to be changed in order to actually improve your paper. I think a lot of students are waiting for feedback so that other people can tell them what to do. And if you get stuck, that's exactly what you should do. You should come to me. You should ask me, or if you're taking one of my classes, you should come to me and ask me. But I think a lot of students don't realize that there's a lot of things you can do in the way in which you approach writing that allows you to provide yourself with good quality feedback. And the first step is to become a lot more mindful of what it is you're doing in the writing process. And the process that I'm giving you forces you to be more mindful when you might not naturally move in that direction, right? Effortlessly. Okay, because the key here is that you're not just haphazardly doing stuff. You're not just writing, you're writing thoughtfully. You've created a system for yourself that demands that you write thoughtfully. And as a result, you are more thoughtful in understanding where the improvements need to happen and what changes need to be made. Okay. Now, a quick caveat. So no matter what, I'm going to be honest with you, to improve as a writer, you need to actually read more, okay? Ideally across different styles and genres, okay? Reading and writing are two sides of the same coin. You'll hit a ceiling in writing if you don't also read good quality work and vice versa, right? They feed off of each other, right? It's like an art critic who doesn't know the first thing about how art is created and they're trying to give critiques about an art piece. Like, you're going to have limits to the quality of critique that you can give if you don't actually understand anything about the process of creating art, right? Because it's one of the key components of what makes an piece of art valuable, right? But one of the things I hope you notice is that if you follow this approach, you'll gain a better understanding and appreciating for writing, which hopefully will also help you better appreciate quality writing elsewhere when you read, okay? And also be able to identify more mediocre writing styles, right? Which will then, through exposure to good writing, will then help you become a better better writer, and then in a circle we go. Now, to be a better reader, there's a different process that you need to engage in. That's for another video. I'll try to get that out to you as quickly as possible. But that's another area that I think creating a better system in your approach to reading is going to help you be a better reader in the same way that this sort of system and approach for your writing should help you become a better, more thoughtful, insightful writer. Okay, so I hope that helps. And if you're a student in my class, just know that this is not optional. You're required. You need to write your papers in this particular way. I want you to try it, and that's why I'm forcing it as part of the assignment, because I want you to experience just how different it feels and just how different the results are when you approach writing in this way. And as I said, it might seem like additional work. It does require a little bit more planning ahead of time because you're not trying to do all the writing at once. Though you could technically do these kind of like one after another. But one of the things I hope that I've made clear is that you're actually going to write more effectively and at a higher quality just by switching up your approach to writing. Just by switching up your approach. And I just want you to experience it, which is why I'm requiring it. I want you to try it out. I want you to experience a change, and I'm fairly certain that you're going to experience something different than if you've used any of these other methods that are not so effective. And that should hopefully motivate you to continue writing in the way that I'm suggesting. Okay? In any case, good luck to you. Feel free to leave comments, questions, any of that, and I'll do my best to try to answer anything that you have for me. All right, until next time.